Hey pre-calculus, in this video I'll be going over proving trig identities, and this is 5-1 day 2. So first of all, to prove an identity, to prove trig identities, we transform the equation until both sides are identical. We often start with one side, and transform it to the other. Until it's identical to the other side. And transform it until it's identical to the other side. Okay, to do this we use algebra. And trig identities. So you need to know basic algebra. So you took algebra 1 and 2. And we've been doing stuff throughout this whole year that you'll apply. So the trig identities are going to be the reciprocal identities. We talked about this the other day. These are the ones you know so far. So reciprocal, quotient, Pythagorean, and there's one we haven't gone over. I'm going to do it right now. Even/odd function identity. So this is 6 more. They all come from the unit circle. It's pretty intuitive. Unless you don't know the unit circle, then it's going to be challenging. The first one is that sine of a negative angle theta is equal to negative sine theta. Then we have cosine of negative theta is equal to cosine theta. And then tangent of theta, or negative theta, is equal to negative tangent. That's very frustrating. I'll space it out. So cosecant negative theta is equal to negative cosecant theta. Secant of a negative angle is equal to secant positive, and then cotangent of a negative angle is equal to negative cotangent theta. Alright, I quickly paused it and changed it so it lined up. Okay, so like I said, these are pretty intuitive, which is really nice. It comes from the unit circle. The other thing that's really nice about these is sine, cosine, and tangent. their reciprocal functions work very similarly, which also makes sense. All right, so I have a list of tips for you guys. There is no real order, I guess, to these tips. I do think they're good. Okay, so my first tip is to rewrite everything. So this is tips when you're doing proofs. I recommend rewriting everything in terms of sine and cosine. Another tip, this isn't, for the problems we're starting out with, this isn't going to be super frequent you'll have to do this, but it is a good tip. So if you get stuck, try simplifying, see if you can factor. So see if you can simplify by factoring out like terms. Are there any common factors? Okay, my next tip is if you have like something plus something or something minus something, and you've got fractions, rewrite them. Rewrite as a single fraction. This one won't come up for a little while, but multiply by a conjugate if you need to. For example, right, the conjugate, remember, if you have a plus b, the conjugate is a minus b. So that's a good trick. And then if you see a squared term, or the number 1, look for Pythagorean identities. See if you can use the Pythagorean identity. Alright, and then my last tip, and this one's probably the most important, is to try. It sounds silly, but you really need to try. You need to do your best and keep trying. If you're stuck, try something else. Okay, but you need to try. You can't just sit there and stare at a blank. You need to try to apply a trig identity. You need to do something. And if it's not working out, go back and try again. All right, so here's an example of a proof. We're going to prove secant of x minus cosine of x equals sine of x times tangent of x. So typically we start on one side. I'm going to start with secant of x minus cosine of x. Alright, and because this is a proof, we need to make sure that we're stating our reasoning for each step. So I'm going to start with, I'm going to change secant to be 1 over cosine. So that was the reciprocal identity. Right, for secant. Alright, now because I have a fraction and this doesn't have a denominator, I'm going to do a common denominator. So I'm going to multiply this by cosine over cosine, and I want to go straight to just rewriting it, if you're okay with that, right? So if I multiply this by cosine over cosine to get a common denominator, this will become cosine squared of x. And I'll be able to combine these into one fraction. You could do that as two steps if you wanted to. So that's just algebra. Getting a common denominator is just algebra. Alright, the next thing I'm going to do is, I've got a 1 minus cosine squared, so I'm going to try to think, I see something that's being squared, is this representative of a Pythagorean identity? And it is, right? 1 minus cosine squared, if I manipulate the Pythagorean identity, I will be left with, or one of them, I'm left with sine squared of x. So you want to keep track of what your goal is to get to, but at the same time, you also want to just try to like play around and manipulate. So what did I just do? I just used the Pythagorean identity. And I manipulated it so that it was sine squared of x equals 1 minus cosine squared of x. Right, so if I move over cosine. Alright, we're super close to getting sine times tangent. Because I want sine first and then tangent, and this is where I'll pay more attention, I'm going to break this up into two fractions. I'm going to have it be sine of x times sine of x over cosine of x. Okay, and that's important because that's going to get half of my correct answer. And this is, again, just algebra, just breaking it up. And then here, I've got sine over cosine, so I'm going to use the quotient identity and rewrite that as tangent of x. And that was the quotient identity for tangent. And we have now successfully proven that secant minus cosine is equivalent to sine times tangent. So like I said, you really just need to keep trying. You need to try to manipulate as much as you can. My recommendation is when you're doing problems like these, to try to not look at this list of tips, try to take a guess and be like, okay, like what can I do here, right? We could have changed this cosine using the reciprocal identity. I think it's easier most of the time to rewrite everything in terms of sine and cosine. Sometimes you don't want to, sometimes you do, but just play around with it. And then just keep attempting. You need to just keep manipulating as much as you can. Practice will make this way easier.